Okay, let's get started and hopefully some more folks will join us. I am Rubie Coles. I am the program director for the Diverse City Fund. And we are very pleased that we're able to offer this second session of Ask the Funder. Some of you all attended the first one that was in September. And we hope to have a third one sometime in the spring. I'm really pleased to have three more of my good colleagues, one of which we've been colleagues for probably close to 20 years. And that's Carolynn Brunette from Prince Charitable Trust, and Nadine Kearns, who I've probably known almost 20 years. Before she came to Meyer, she was in the nonprofit sector, and it's been great that she's joined the grant makers community. And Dara Johnson, who until 2 weeks ago was the executive director at the Horning Family Foundation, but has graciously agreed to still join us and talk about Horning, even though she is, we're encroaching on her time off, but we really appreciate her making some space for us this afternoon. So welcome everybody, those who are just joining. As you can see in the chat, we're asking for name and organization and one thing that you wish for in 2022. And I'm gonna have each of our panelists start. Carolynn, I'll start with you and just give us a very brief overview of your foundation. You know, your 1 minute or so elevator speech about Prince Charitable Trust.
Okay, so I am Carolynn Brunette, and thank you, Rubie, and thank you for this opportunity to share a little bit about what we're doing. I want to sort of preface this with our work is very much in transition right now. So what I will say about our work is not quite accurately reflected on our website just yet. So, so just know that I'm still working on my elevator speech. But we are a family foundation. We have grant making programs in Washington, D.C., in Chicago, and in Newport, Rhode Island. And the work is overseen right now by the 4th generation of family members. And again, it's in transition. So I apologize if what I say is not altogether clear. We have our grant making program in this area is about $2.4 million annually. And we have 2 geographic priority areas within this region, and that is in DC. We focus on neighborhoods in wards 7 and 8. And then we also focus on the Northern Virginia Piedmont region. And while the work is focused in geographic priority areas, it looks different because they're 2 totally different parts of the region. The general sort of organizing frame is around livability. So that includes the environment, social and economic factors that make a place livable. So within that context, we're very interested in racial equity, we're interested in resiliency, and we support anchor institutions, systems change, movement building, and power building, and a host of things that are sort of funneled through priority issues, which are the environment, health, and the arts. So that's generally what we're doing.
Great, thank you. Nadine?
Hi, everyone, and Happy New Year. As Rubie mentioned, I'm relatively new to the Meyer Foundation. I joined in 2018 to lead our partnerships and strategy in the District of Columbia, where I live. I live in Ward 4. I've been here since 2004. And we at the Meyer Foundation, we have a long history. We were founded in 1944. And the Meyer Foundation is named for Eugene and Agnes Meyer. So those were the founding family. And currently we operate and do our grant making in DC, Maryland, and Virginia, which has always been the case. And in Maryland, that is Prince George's County and Montgomery County, and then a number of jurisdictions in Northern Virginia that you can see on our website. And then of course, the District of Columbia, where we've always had a deep and long history of supporting organizations. Our grant making is in the, our focus is investing in movements and organizations that are building power to affect systems change. And we are committed to building a region where racism and its consequences no longer exist. And we fund organizations that are working to build power of communities and organizations to push systems towards that future. In practical sense, our grant making is, we have an open solicitation model where organizations can come to us and submit an interest form, and if invited, submit a proposal, and that is how we govern our grant making. We were always known for being a funder that funded in specific program areas, most recently education, housing, and economic well-being. However, with our recent push into racial and economic justice, we have reprioritized our focus to invest more in movements and communities and not only in specific issues. So we have an open way of reviewing and looking at what is the work and what does it plan to do to change systems, and where does it take place? And obviously I mentioned DC, Maryland, and Virginia, and that is the Meyer Foundation. And you can learn more about our grant making on our website, and I'm happy to also answer any questions.
Thanks so much, Nadine. And Dara, going to tell us about Horning?
I sure will. So thank you again, Diversity Fund, for inviting me to join the conversation. And thanks to all of you that have taken time out of your day. I know how precious time is. So thank you for joining. I am the former ED of the Horning Family Foundation as of December 31st. That was my last day after being with the organization for 6.5 years. And so HFF, how we refer to it, is a DC-based family foundation that for the past 17 years really has focused their funding on education and specific location in Ward 8 DC. In February of last year, we did complete a strategic plan that focuses the foundation's work on creating a more equitable Washington, DC, where all people can live the life that they desire to live. And so while we are still currently focusing on education, the foundation also funds in the area of housing, workforce development, health, and also food access. We award about 1.2 million. I'm still saying we as if I'm there, but the foundation awards $1.2 million annually through multi-year general operating grants to both direct service and advocacy organizing groups. So we only award to 501c3s or groups with a fiscal sponsor. And we do not make grants to individuals, and we typically do not fund capital campaigns. So the foundation operates 3 main grant making portfolios. One is the education, which is our longest standing portfolio. Then we have the Neighbor to Neighbor, which is in its 3rd year, and it's a small grants program with capacity building that is awarded to small community-based organizations located in 9 specific communities in Ward 8. And then most recently launched the Racial Justice Initiative, and we just completed that first grant round in November of 2021, which provides 5-year grants to Black-led organizations located in the DMV. And I'll just add that both Neighbor to Neighbor and the Racial Justice Initiative uses a participatory grant-making approach. So we have community members that serve on the grant-making team, not only serve on the team, but they help to actually develop and design the grant program and make the grant decisions. And then I'll just close with it's a family foundation, and the board is made up of only family members. So it's the founders, their 3 children, and their spouses. And it is a very, very small staff foundation. It was myself as ED and then also a program officer. And so right now there's an interim director, and then the organization will begin a search for their next ED very soon.
Okay, thanks. And for those who have just joined us, Happy New Year. Please put your name and organization in the chat and one thing that you wish for in 2022. So let's get into the grant making process. Let's talk about how you all make grants, You know, do you accept letters? Do you require a letter of inquiry? Is it request only? Is it open? How often you make grants? Those kinds of things. And this time I'll start with you, Nadine, and just talk a little bit about how Meyer makes grants, and then the other folks, please jump in.
Sure. We've recently, as in 2018, started using a new process for awarding grants. And we work very hard each year based on feedback from our grantee partners and the community at large to refine our process towards making it more open and less work. We know it takes a long time for folks to write grant applications, because I used to write them. So we know what it takes to submit those. And so our fiscal year is the calendar year. So we have just opened our grant making process the beginning of this year. Please follow us on our website, our mailing list, as well as our social media to get more information. But our website is actually pretty comprehensive. So if you go on our website now, you'll see that the process is to submit an interest form, which is similar to a letter of inquiry, and it's open to anyone to submit. It's a shorter form that just asks a few questions, some about your organization, that we just have to do that to make sure you are eligible in terms of your 501c3, you're operating in DC, Maryland, Virginia, or you have a fiscal sponsor, and then answer some brief questions. We review those as they come in, and within about a month or so, we will inform applicant whether or not they should submit a proposal. So it is a two-stage process. So we've opted to do that to be able to have a shorter interest form and then a longer proposal if we see that there's potential alignment with what we're funding. And so the timeline for those, last year, in the middle of COVID, in the middle of just sort of having also a relatively new grant making system, we did a lot of testing of what it means to do this much more flexible, responsive grant making, and it worked. Then we did about 4 rounds of grant making last year, so we've carried that into 2022. And if you go on our website, you'll see that our intention is to award grants in March, June, September, and in November. And you can kind of follow the chart for when you should submit an interest form if you wish to be considered for a particular grant award date. And our senior leadership team reviews the final recommendations from myself, Meyer Foundation, as I thought someone put in the chat, what is the name of the organization? So Meyer Foundation, and then approves those grants. So that's our process. That's how often grants are made. And the review is internal review. We look at, we ask the questions, we look at the answers. We're not looking for perfect answers. We're not looking for sort of longer answers as well. We just want to know, what is the work, what are you doing, and how does it align what we're doing. We have a very extensive grants guide that is on our website, and we've it's fairly extensive, provides some examples of the type of work that we support. We've also given some straight up examples on our website as well. So it's an incredible resource to be able to learn more about what it's like to apply for a grant at the Meyer Foundation. And I'll stop here unless, Rubie, you think I haven't addressed anything from the point of view of somebody who's—
No, that's good. That's good. Who else?
Yeah, I can jump in, and I'll just share that, the 6.5 years I was with the foundation, we have grown a lot and put different things into practice. And so I would say that we utilize a combination of grant making practices, which really dictate like how we accept applications, what is the review process like, and even down to the final decisions. And so earlier I mentioned like the 3 portfolios that we have. So I'm going to first just talk about the education, which I'll put in parentheses, primary portfolio, because that is where most of our grant making is happening right now. And in that portfolio, it is an invitation only process. So we do not accept applications from organizations that we have not invited to apply. And that had been the practice since the beginning of the foundation. And then I'm also going to talk a little bit about how we have evolved and have just done better with our grant making practices. But we still, in this portfolio, only accept applications from organizations that have been invited to apply. Most of the grantee partners in this portfolio, the foundation has been in relationship with about an average to 8 years. Something that the foundation really values is the relationship and partnership with grantees. So you won't see a lot of 1-year grants with organizations. And so for this portfolio, the process will send an invitation of application letter to the organization and ask them to submit an application. And because a lot of these organizations are very familiar with the foundation and we're familiar with them, it is a very abbreviated application. And I will say, even in this year, in 2022, before I left, the decision was made not even to have those groups submit applications, but we'll do a call with the organization to get the information that is needed to help us to determine grant awards for 2022. And so that was also in 2020, like during the pandemic, and even in 2022, we held conversation with grantees in lieu of a written application and in lieu of reporting. And so that will happen again this year. And so after the conversations, the staff members will prepare what we call summary sheets of each conversation. We present it to the board with the complete docket of organizations that are up for funding prior to the board's spring board meeting. And at that meeting, staff will present the docket and engage in a conversation with the board about the grantees. And at that time, those decisions are made. So the education portfolio, the grants are once a year, and they happen in the spring. So that process starts around January, and the awards are made at the spring board meeting, which typically happens in April. For the Neighbor to Neighbor and Racial Justice Initiative, I spoke earlier that the foundation uses a participatory grant making approach. So these portfolios are open requests for proposals. And so the process used to review and make final award decisions is decided by the grant making team. So the application, the funding priorities, the application process, all of that will be decided by the grant making team, and it is decided by the grant making team. The Racial Justice Initiative, the awards are made in November. Those awards are 5-year grants, and so in another 5 years, they'll launch another cycle. I don't know if that cycle will happen in November, but please stay tuned to the website. All that information would be shared there. For the Neighbor to Neighbor, that is an annual grant making process that happens around early spring, so like March or April, and decisions are made by December. And again, the Neighbor to Neighbor is specifically for Ward 8 community-based organizations that operate in 9 specific communities in Ward 8. And so typically once applications come in, the grant making team, they will review them either as teams or as individuals. And then the full team will come back together to discuss the full docket and make the final decisions about who gets awarded and what amount gets awarded. So those are the ways that we handle the grant making process. I will say that in 2020, we made the decision, and I believe this was the first time the foundation did it, where we actually did rapid response grants because of all that we were learning and seeing as a result of COVID. I don't know if this is a decision that the foundation will make and have a discussion around this year, if rapid response funding or emergency funding, if there will be grant dollars set aside annually for that. Right now, it had not been, and so that will be something to pay attention to. Again, all that information will be communicated on the website. Any information that relates to like open processes, that's like identified on the website. And so also speaking about, are there current funding opportunities and things in place? I can't speak to that for 2022. I know staff and board will be deciding what that looks like before the grant cycle launches for this year.
Okay, do you want me to jump in, Rubie, or is it good? Okay. So Prince, like I said, and I feel like what you're hearing from Nadine and Dara and what I'm about to say is that a lot of foundations learned a lot in the last couple of years about what was really needed and what we maybe can not don't have to require. And I think that evolving and changing as the needs change in the community is something that we're all trying to figure out where is the balance. And so we're still sort of in that process ourselves, but right now our grant making process is that we have 2 grant rounds a year, one in the spring and one in the fall. And we too only accept, it's by invitation only, no unsolicited proposals. And there are lots of reasons for that, but partly it's because we're small staffed. Also, we like to build relationships with partners when we are engaging in a grant making sort of partnership. We will typically meet with organizations before they even decide to pursue a proposal, and trying to assess mutual interests. And the reason for that is also to not have people spinning their wheels, and for us too, not to spin our wheels on work that may or may not be a good fit. But we're also trying to develop authentic relationships with our partners, because we also recognize that we're not in the field every day, and we need to hear from the people on the ground about what's happening and what are the needs. And so it's also in an effort to build relationships and understand the needs at the ground level. If organizations are invited to apply, there's an online application. We also work with 501c3 organizations or fiscally sponsored organizations, or leaders that have programs that are sponsored by 501c3s. Most of our grants are general operating, and we are working on the guidelines internally to make multi-year commitments so that we can not, because we say also Prince makes general operating grants, but we also have grantees, like Dara was saying. You have 8-year, the typical relationship is 8 years. For us, it's like 10 to 20. And so we have to change our guidelines too, because we are having organizations apply every year, and we're looking at ways to streamline that, like you're saying, Nadine, because we know these organizations, and we don't feel like we all need to be spending our time on paperwork. It will be better to be spending our time in the community. So just one last thing. Once you submit the proposal, once the invitation's in, you submit the proposal. It's about a 3-month process. They're reviewed internally, follow-up conversations with program officers, then recommendations are made, and awards are given. You are alerted about an award after about 3 months.
So go ahead, Dara.
I was like, can I jump, because before we get to the next section, because there's like a question that ties into, I just want to do a clarification. Someone asked about what we mean by invitation only, and like how do we select those groups. So it's like Meyer they'll put out a larger RFP, and so you'll see that publicly, and so you could apply to it. Similar to what we did with some of the other grant making that we have. And then there are organizations where we might connect with other funders to find out like who's in this space. So for instance, in education, who's in the space that's working in literacy that is really making moves and strides for communities that we're focused on. So we might reach out to another funder. We might reach out to another nonprofit that we're already in relationship with to get that understanding. Or I would even say, I have been in a number of community meetings and have learned about groups in the community from the conversation that happened in the meeting. And then from that point, I will ask someone in the community that I have a relationship with, like, what do you know about this organization? What are they doing? I kind of do my own homework about the organization before connecting with them to have this conversation, and then inviting them to submit an application. There are a number of ways. I would say, foundations are similar, but they're also very different. So individual foundations may have their own way in how they go about selecting individuals to apply for a grant. But I know sometimes funders may reach out to say, hey, I just learned about this really amazing group. They seem aligned with what you're doing. Would you be happy to connect with them? And I am happy to connect, but the connection doesn't always mean that funding or an application, invitation to apply comes from that. But I like to keep my eyes and ears open to see what is happening in the communities that as a foundation, we say we want to support and invest in, and then look for those opportunities to kind of do my own homework about the group, and then reaching out to someone within the organization to speak to them. And I will just say, when I reach out, I already have in my mind that I'm going to ask this group to submit an application, because I understand, I don't want to present that there's an opportunity when there isn't. So I like to do my homework on the back end before having that conversation with the organization. I hope that helped.
Yeah, that's great. In fact, I'm glad you said, because I was going to actually move to a couple of things. One is, and maybe Carolyn and Nadine, you can also chime in, but sort of a two-parter. And one question that came up a couple of times on the registration form is, how do groups form relationships, especially small groups and new groups? What are the opportunities, or are there opportunities for groups to form a relationship with funders, especially if they're small or they're new? And then also related to that, of course, is the due diligence, and how do you do your due diligence for people who are not already your grantees? And there's a very common saying in the foundation world, and that is, if you've met one foundation, you've met one foundation, right? That's it. So that's why we've had these conversations where we've had multiple funders, because I want our grantees to see that, and our other partners to see that no foundation operates the same. And but there are a variety of ways in which foundations approach their work. And so Carolyn and Nadine, maybe you can chime in about how you do your due diligence, and then also, are there opportunities, or how would a small group or a new group get to know the foundation and you get to know them?
Sure, I can start. It's very similar to Dara, although you're right. You know one foundation, and the answer is one foundation. But very similar to, we try to be in the community, so we do that very intentionally by going to community meetings and talking to as many people as we can when we're there. We also rely on trusted partners, our grantee partners, to make connections for us when they feel like, I think, Dara, you were talking about that before, like this really aligns with what it seems like you're trying to do. When we have conversations with grantees, we don't just talk about their organization and their specific programs. We try to talk about the context, what's happening in your neighborhood, and what also is bringing to bear on the issues and the people you're trying to serve, and how can we together work on that thing. And so that's how we tend to get connected to other leaders. Also, we try to be very accessible. Our direct lines are on the website. You can email us, we'll call you back, we'll answer our phones. It's a value that we hold true, and so reaching out directly to us is a very acceptable way to try to even just initiate a conversation.
I think it's a mix for us. I think, yes, it is true that you applied to Meyer, and it's the first we've ever heard of an organization that has happened, where we'll get an interest form submitted by a new organization, and we hadn't had a relationship, we don't know much. So then we start looking, we read the application, we will set up a phone call to learn more about the work. So then our due diligence starts. But in a lot of cases, it's what Dara and Carolyn described, that organizations come to us because they are in an existing coalition that we're funding, or they're partner to some groups that we're already funding. So in the proposal stage, one of the things that we ask organizations is, who are you in partnership with? Who do you work with that you have a shared strategy, you have a shared vision, that you're implementing the work, and sort of how does it work? And a lot of times grantee partners will say to us and those answers, and in subsequent conversations, that there's this new organization, they're doing great work, and this is what they bring to this ecosystem. This is what they're really good at doing, and this is why it's important for all of us to be supported. And so that's one way in which we'll continue doing some of our due diligence, even through past a grant award to a new grantee partner. We try to learn a lot more about who they work with and what are we missing. We're always asking ourselves what organizations is contributing to moving this issue forward, and what are we missing and what ways we can support them. In terms of our due diligence, we read the interest form, we read the proposal, we'll go on the website. I know Partnerships and Strategy Director will go on the website. In some cases, organizations may not have a website if they're very new and they don't have the infrastructure capacity. I'll look at the social media of an organization or a person that talks about their work and try to learn more about how they show up in community and what is the work that they're doing. So if it's out there and it's public and I can Google it, I will read up on their work and see. And pre-COVID, part of it was being out and about in community and learning more about what is there. So now that we're not doing that as much, so doing these types of conversations where I'm able to engage with groups that we're not funding is also very helpful.
And I'll just add that Diversity Fund's grant-making team as well really values groups that are working in partnership and in coalition. In fact, several years ago, we added a coalition category to our grant-making so that one, to encourage groups to come together to work towards a shared goal, especially small grassroots groups that don't have a lot of resources, and two, to provide support to those coalitions that are already existing and are already working together towards a shared goal. And so that's also something, and how we learn about groups as well is through the coalitions and the partnerships of our grantees. And so I would say that it's really important that you be able to show who else in the community you are partnering with and working with, and not be a lone person or group working on an issue, because that is not valued as much as folks who are working in partnership. And so I think that's a good transition into what makes a good proposal, right? What are you all looking for in a proposal? Are there some do's and don'ts that some tips that you can give folks about, of all the proposals and applications you read over the years, what are the really good ones? What are common mistakes that folks make? What makes a good proposal or even a great proposal? And what are some things that folks should try to avoid doing? Anybody can start.
Yeah, so I'll start, and I'll just say, just top of just knowing that foundations read so many proposals, receive so many phone calls, that if your proposal can be as clear and easy to follow as possible, that the reviewer can follow the story of the organization and that you're trying to communicate. Because if you can imagine, so with the Racial Justice Initiative, we received over 100 proposals. So if you can imagine trying to read even through 30 of those and really get a good understanding of what the organization is about. So I would say a clear and easy to follow application. Follow all instructions and answer the questions completely. Again, philanthropy is not at this point yet. So every foundation has their own set of application criteria. They have their questions. It might seem like they're asking the same question twice. I would not be surprised, but answer the questions completely. And I would say, don't assume that the reviewer or the staff will have time to reach back out for follow-up questions. Sometimes that's not able to happen with the tight turnaround time. So I would say communicate clearly, but, you know, over communicate sometimes so that you're not assuming that the reviewer will pick up on what you didn't say. And then if they didn't, they'll still have time to follow up with the questions, because that may not happen. When I'm reviewing a proposal, I'm looking to see, like, first and foremost, is the organization's work aligned to the grant priorities and like the criteria that has been laid out by the grant making team or by the foundation, because that is going to be the question that comes up for every proposal. Well, how is this aligned to what the foundation is trying to do? Language. When I first came to the foundation, I'm not saying anybody on this call does it, but a lot of the applications, they focus so much on the deficits of the community. And so I would say to balance, yes, to uplift the challenges. Like, none of us are naive. We know that there are challenges and there are issues that need to be addressed, but balance the challenges, or as you highlight the challenges, also highlight the assets of the communities that you are in relationship with. I think that is very important, especially when I'm reading a proposal. If everything is just so negative, I'm like, well, where is the value and the assets of the people in the community? If the application asks for additional material, even if it's optional, if you have it, share it. That helps to communicate the story of the work of your organization. And don't be afraid to, like, toot your own horn, pat yourself on the back. Like, you're doing an excellent job. Show that you're doing an excellent job. This is not the time to be shy or bashful. Definitely toot your own horn. And then just a few tips. I would just say, allow yourself as much time as possible to complete the application, especially if it's electronic. Technology is our friend when it wants to be, and it can be our enemy when it wants to be. So give yourself enough time. If the foundation does offer like an information session, if you or someone from your organization can attend, please do. But if there's a recording and you can attend, watch the recording. I think a lot of great questions are generated and asked at those sessions. And then hopefully, I know some foundations will send out like a transcript of the key questions and the responses. So if you can attend, please do. And I know there was some smaller organizations, like, there's not a designated grant writer, like, you just don't have the capacity to do that. And so if you can work in smaller teams to create a grant proposal, but then have someone to do like a final review to make sure that is the flow and the consistency, it just makes sense as you go through the proposal. I would say for our foundation, we have not been really big on data. So to load a lot of numbers, that's not necessarily going to get the proposal awarded. We want to see the complete story and be honest, like, even with your organizational challenges and the things that you're working on and the lesson that you learned. But I would just say, top of mind, just clear responses that are easy to follow, and just make sure you answer all the questions completely. And I will say, as Carolynn brought up, if you are working with the foundation who has phone numbers on the website, or say reach out if you have a question, please take them up on it. Just take them up on it. Even if the question is there, you think it's answered, if you have any doubt, just reach out to the foundation to get some clarity.
Okay, I can go on this part. So just to add a couple of things, that for us, because we try to meet with people before we engage in a new funding relationship, the application process the application itself is a little bit less important. And this is as we get more and more into neighborhood level work and trying to meet leaders where they are, we don't want to rely only on a beautifully written proposal. So it's a little bit less important for us, but I would agree with you, Dara, that clear, concise language, especially don't assume that we know anything, because we might not. we don't know, we're not experts in all fields, in all communities. So I definitely use it as an opportunity to educate us. But and don't use jargon, because like Dara was saying, if you read 400 proposals and they're really heavily jargon laden, it takes a lot of work to figure out what it is you're trying to do. So the clearer you can be about what it is you're trying to do in the simplest language possible, it definitely works to your advantage. And the other thing I would say is that we need to see is how do you know what it is that you're doing is needed by whomever it is you're trying to serve? How do you know that it's needed? Because again, we're not in your community. We don't necessarily know exactly what's happening in your neighborhood. So if you can give us some idea that's clear about why it's needed, again, not only focusing on the deficits of the community, but really who's in the community and what value are they bringing to bear on the issue. I think that's huge. And then we also look for community directed and led solutions.
Yeah, I would add specific to Meyer, I think because our interest form is so short, it essentially is once you get past like the organization's name, who's the executive director or the lead organizer, like these are the basic questions. We just ask like what is the work that you're doing? I mean, specifically, it's how does your organization build power to change systems, advance racial and or economic justice, and contribute to a just and equitable COVID-19 recovery. So again, first is, does the work that you're doing align with our strategy, which is to invest in building power, and our priority, which in 2022 is we're still focusing on how do we continue to support a just and equitable COVID-19 recovery. So that's the first thing we look for and the answer to that question. And we know that everyone responded to COVID in terms of whether or not you shifted the way you engage community, you moved from in-person organizing to virtual organizing. We know that, but what we're looking for is how have you done some analysis or knowing that the communities that you work with, what systems failed? What specific policies and practices are you working to change so that when we come out of COVID, that we don't go back to the way things were. So we're looking to get some changes made so that when, I don't want to call it, the next pandemic comes or we come out of this one, that we can look back and say that we had identified in some ways in which education, housing, health, civic engagement failed, and we were able to push and advocate for some of these things, some changes that will make an incredible difference in the lives of the communities and the constituents that you engage with. Answer that question. And again, I think everyone mentioned that we used to get 2 to 3 pages, and there's a cap, it's 400 words. So it will limit you because we're forcing you not to have to go out and cite 15 pages of research to tell us what the issue is, but to say that to tell the story. We have been working in this neighborhood, in this community. We have a core base of constituents. We know that this is what the issue is that we need to change, and this is the strategy that we're using to change it. We are going to push council to change legislation. We know that CFSA has done a terrible job at XYZ, and we need to change XYZ, and this is how we're going about doing it, and this is who we're working with. Just lay out your work and tell us that story. Interestingly, last year we gave people the option of submitting a video response to the interest form, and we didn't really have any takers. And I think it's because people were probably thinking maybe there's a catch to like telling the story, and like, we were looking for something like produced, like some kind of documentary, but we weren't. We were just trying to figure out a way to level the playing field for folks who don't have a grant writer to tell their story. So we do say explicitly, we're not looking for perfect prose. We're not looking to read your novel. We really want to know what is the work that you're doing. How do you know, again, as Carolyn mentioned and Dara, how do you know this is important? Not from, I read a study that this zip code has an issue, but that because you've been working in this community, that this is an issue, and this is who is leading this work, and this is the strategy, and this is how we're going about changing what it is that we've identified as failed. I know it's very general, because in that general way of coming to us, we'll learn what's important. We'll learn who you're working with. We'll learn what is the work. It's essentially what we're asking, like, what is the work, and how do we support you in making and getting you to the point where, you know, you've made some progress on this issue.
Thanks so much for that. And I will ditto what everyone else said in terms of diversity funds application. It's very short. And again, our grant making team values exactly what was said, which is less on what the issues are, more on the assets, and how do you know what it is that you're proposing to do works and is needed. And also your track record of change is another thing. You know, what have been the victories? They can be small. We understand that in social change, it happens a little bit at a time. There aren't these huge leaps. And so if you have small changes along the way towards your big goal, we want to know about those too. And we also have the capacity to do video applications for the first time last year as well. And we did have a couple of takers, but not as many as we had anticipated. So I would just encourage folks to tell that story and to take advantage of telling it orally as opposed to with the written word, if that's your strong suit. So, so we only have a little bit more time, but you know, I also want to just briefly touch on what makes a good report, or what your reporting requirements are. And for instance, with DC Fund, we don't have a formal reporting requirement. We try to check in with our grantees once a year. But what about you all? Is there a formal reporting requirement? And if you do have a formal reporting requirement, again, if it's written, what makes a good report? And any tips you have on reporting?
We have we've also painfully taken turns to make it less painful for people. So we've gotten to the point where we do more multi-year grants. So we have interim reports, which are not as extensive. And essentially we ask, you know, how did the work go? What challenges did you hit? What have you learned? So there's a narrative portion to it that essentially is we want to hear more about how the work is going. And what have you learned in carrying out that work? And what progress have you made towards your goal? So instead of using the language of outcomes, we've shifted to using progress indicators, some of ways in which you can come back and tell us how you've made progress, whether it's increasing political will and whether it's grown your base of constituents. So and tell us how you've made that happen. And we actually give folks the option of submitting a report that they've written to another funder if it answers the question. And people have appreciated that. So if you spend time writing, you know, 10 pages to another funder that essentially says the same thing, like this is what our work made happen, this is how we did it, this is what we're learning, you can submit that to us to fulfill the narrative part of the reporting requirement. Or you can opt to have a conversation with the programs and strategy director, one of us, and then we'll take the notes. So some people don't want to write, even if it's like in the report, it's just like the inner report is within grant giving data, which is answering questions. So they're short paragraphs. But even then, if you rather would schedule a 30-minute call with one of us and tell us, and we could have a conversation, then I'll put in whatever it is that you've shared so that it's to help us. We use reporting to learn more about the work. and not to make decisions about money we've already given. I mean, the money's out. So we just want to know how we can be more helpful. What have you learned? How has the work shifted? What happened? What didn't happen? It's really a conversation, and that's why we give the opportunity to have a conversation. But if you have a report you've used for another funder, you can submit that, or you can answer the short form, the short questions.
Yeah, so when I first joined the foundation, we did require reports. So we did the multi-year funding, and then if you had a 3-year grant, every year you would give a report to the foundation. Two things with that. One, the report will come so close to when we would ask for an application that the information was just redundant. And then two, it was just like, this is one more thing that partners have to do. And I know it wasn't just for our foundation, but to sit down and have to write a report. And so we don't really take the report. I'm going to be very honest right now. I'm no longer with the foundation, so I think it's okay. But a lot of the times the reports didn't get the attention that it needed anyway from the foundation. You know, organizations would sit and put all this information together, and sometimes just because of all that was going through it and not really using it the way that it should be used, which was a tool for learning and connecting with our partners. And so we now do phone calls with grantees. And I would say I make a point to attend events that grantees already have scheduled, because a lot of the times the information that would oftentimes show up in a report would be information they're communicating to their community, their partners, in these events that they've already had scheduled. Again, it was like, what can we do to take some of this unnecessary work off of our grantee partners? And so we do phone calls. That information is documented and recorded by the staff, and then we use that just to keep us updated about what is happening with not just the work, but like what's happening with the people in the organization. And so that is really a part of the phone conversation, is learning for the foundation, because our partners are in close contact with communities on the ground. They also have a stronger understanding in the foundation of what's happening on the systems level. So it's this opportunity to learn for us as the foundation, but it's also an opportunity for us to connect with our grantee partners and to connect with them on a personal, individual level, so that we can continue to build the relationships that we have. And I would just say what makes a great report, or what makes the great own conversation, is honesty. Again, toot your horn about the successes, but don't be afraid to share if something didn't work out. You tried something, it didn't work. What we want to see, like, okay, what was the lesson learned? How are you going to pivot? And I remember this is when we were trying to figure out what were the reporting and the questions would look like. So we had like, what's working and what's keeping you up at night? That was a check-in. And then in that conversation, we could talk about, well, were there other people that I could connect grantee partners to, or could I serve as a thought partner around something that was keeping them up at night? And so whether a foundation does reporting or whether they do phone conversations, whatever the method is, it should be an opportunity for learning for both the foundation and the grantee. And I would say for me, because I'm a big relationships person, it's like, how are the people in the organization doing?
That's great. I don't have anything really much to add to that. We also stopped requiring reports a couple of years ago, and we have found that it works so much better for us anyway, because we're building better relationships and we're much more connected to what's happening in the place, because we have really narrowed our geographic focus. And so we're talking to leaders across a few different issue areas. And they have networks, we have networks. And so it really just makes so much more sense to have the relationships versus a piece of paper that is used maybe not as well as we all would like for them to have been used over the years. And so anyway, I agree with everything that everyone has said.
Thank you all so much. We're almost out of time, but there was one other question that we haven't addressed that if we could address really, really quickly, and that is if your foundations provide other kinds of support besides grants, like for work. Do you do capacity building, training, other kinds of things? I will say very quickly for DC Fund grantees, look in the next day or so in your email, we're going to have a project management training that we're going to offer our grantees. But what do you all do in terms of capacity building or other resources? And if you could just really quickly.
Really quickly, I would advise stay tuned to I know we have a newsletter, so sign up on our website and in our social media. A lot of times we do things that are open to non-grantee partners. I know last year or the year before that, we did a series of training around digital organizing. We partnered with another funder and opened the series up to non-grantee partners. So that's one way in which we contribute. And then for current grantee partners, we've had capacity building opportunities. We've also had like a learning and travel fund so that we know we will support small funding for folks to go to conferences and workshops, because a lot of times we know budgets don't support that. In the past, we've supported like a sabbatical program. So there's always opportunities for current grantees, but then also opportunities for non-grantee partners. We have a webinar coming up in January around the social contract with an author that will be talking about how racism has gotten us to where we are now with failed social contract and not being able to meet the needs of communities, not just Black communities. So those are things in which we have open for all in the community to participate.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. This is an area for growth for the foundation. So I think I saw Jordan's name on here. So, but we're on the same page. So, but I will say, shout out to Jordan because we are this year doing capacity building with the Neighbor to Neighbor, the smaller community-based organizations in Ward 8. So they're receiving a grant, but also receiving capacity building support. And then in the past, we have done 1 or 2 convenings with our grantee partners around learning as it relates to, analyzing the education system or undoing racism. But this is an area of, in addition to the grant. So we'll connect organizations to other funders and things of that nature, but in terms of specific programs that the foundation actually operates in, this will be an area of growth. But shout out to the capacity building work that launches soon.
Yeah, and we're pretty similar. We provide additional support to current grantees to do all of the things that you said, but it's mostly through our grant making. We also do convenings in communities of different stakeholders to help promote relationship building and connections and in the introductions. So we're all pretty aligned.
Thank you so much. We're out of time. I was just answering a question about whether video is going to be available. And yes, later in the week, it'll be available both on our website and our YouTube page. I want to thank everybody for joining us. I really, really want to thank my colleagues, the panelists. This was a great session, lots of good information. Like I said, and I would just say for you all, just to reiterate, today's session was open not only to DC Fund grantees, but also to those who have applied to DC Fund, but were not funded. So this is one of the ways we're contributing to the community and building capacity for small nonprofits led by people of color in our city. So thank you all. Stay tuned if you're a grantee for the project management training. Stay tuned, everybody, for a third Ask the Funder session later this spring. And hope this is a fabulous year. 2022 is a fabulous year for all of us. So thanks so much for joining us.